Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Whyte Museum, and welcome to another Fireside Chat. Many of you were here for the 6 Fireside Chats that we did in the past over at Abergwait. They were a wonderful success, but that venue was just too small, as you remember, and we needed a new place, and I needed a break. I completed 10 books in 10 years. And I was tired, I was burned out. So we took a bit of a break, but here we are a few years later. I'm rested, and the Whyte Museum has come up with a terrific new space here in Philippe de La Salle's beautiful original museum that he created exactly 50 years ago. And Philippe is in the audience actually today. So thank you, Philippe, for this beautiful building. So anyways, here we are, voila, Fireside Chats are on again. Oops. So today, Eddie Hunter is sitting with me here. Most of you know Eddie. He's been around town a lot longer than me, and he's seen a lot more than I have. Eddie moved to town in 1934 at the age of 8, and he's lived here pretty much ever since. Now, Eddie, being the modest man that he is, insisted that this be a two-way street, that he be allowed to ask me some questions, which is complete departure from normal. So that's how it will be, back and forth between Eddie and me. So here we go, and I'm going to start off with the first little question that we were talking about earlier. Most of us look back at the good old days with nostalgia and sort of long for an earlier time. Tell me, was it really better in those days than it is today? Better back in the 40s, 50s?
You know it was. I'll answer that in a minute, Chic. I just wanted first, I want to wish everyone a happy birthday. This is our 150th birthday. And I didn't see very many Canadians celebrating, but I guess that's our way of doing it. There was one thing that I was hoping might happen during this year. You know how Newfoundland gets the extra half hour? I thought it'd be sort of original if they gave Vancouver Island the other half hour. So they'd say Newfoundland in another half hour and an hour or half hour earlier. And, yeah, I didn't. Apparently, no one else thought of that across. But it's good. It's a wonderful country. And Chic, I know you love Canada as much as I do.
I do, absolutely. I think most of us would agree it's the best place to live on earth.
Definitely.
Yeah.
One thing I couldn't understand about it, they call Canada a young country at 150. I'm only 91 and they call me an old man. That doesn't seem fair, does it? Anyway, to answer your question, have things changed? I can remember I started here in grade 3. I didn't fall in love until grade 5, and I still love this girl. I think I do anyway. Her name was Iris Cutting. This was when I was, like, you had it so straight in your mind what you were going to be. I had no idea what I was going to be, and I tried various things. And when I first met Iris, she invited me to her house, her family home, and her dad was a Mountie, and she showed me his spurs. He had taken the spikes off and put coins on as a friendly gesture to the horse. And while she was explaining this, I was falling in love with her, and I thought, well, maybe I could be a Mountie. Then I realized I was going to be a foot too short to be a Mountie. So that didn't go. I always admired Jimmy Simpson. He was a character, and he looked like he had a secret of some sort. He coached our hockey team briefly. I don't think he knew too much about hockey, but he coached us, and I thought he looked like he had a secret that he was going to give us that would turn our team around. But the only secret he had, I think, was that he did hunting still up in the Bow Lake area, unbeknown to, I don't know. There was another aspect that I thought I might be in entertainment. This lady was traveling across Canada at the time. It was still Depression years. And she had a script that she'd go into a town and get some kids to act out the script that she had. Anyway, I ended up being one of the kids, and it was sort of an introduction to entertainment, or we thought so at the time. Anyway, I sang a song in it called Polly Wolly Doodle All the Day. And at the end of it, it ends with fairly well, fairly well, fairly well, my fair. I couldn't sing then either. And she wanted me to do splits with it. And on the splits, I ripped my pants. And that was the highlight of the whole show. I mean, she did have a line for me. She said I was to say to her, Miss Bell, why do balloons rise? And her reply was, they're full of hot air. And my reply was, well, what's keeping you down? So she sort of set me on the wrong track for humor. It was, humor was out of my future. Besides my teacher at the time, Miss Kratz. You've heard of Miss Kratz. Please say you have. Anyway, she was a wonderful woman. And she said, Eddie, you're not funny, you're pathetic. So that was another decision I didn't have to make. But we had some wonderful people in this town. And it was small enough that you knew everyone. Norman Luxton, Gus Baracus at the Banff Cafe, he would bring out his mandolin and play whenever he wanted to entertain some people. He was just fabulous. And Charlie Beale would be there daily having coffee. We just had some great people. There's one you may not have heard of. His name was Percy Williams. Anyone ever? Anyway, Percy, I think, was in the construction business. But I saw him this day on Banff Avenue. He stood on the main street and he looked up Banff Avenue and he looked down and he looked up and he looked down, and he did that for quite a while, which seemed like a long time, until he got a little group of people. And then he finally said, so this is Banff. I thought it would be bigger. And he walked off. But that's the type of people I had guiding me into my future. So I don't have to apologize. It's because of these people. But while I was saying silly things like that, there was a young man from Calgary. It sounds like a limerick or something. Anyway, that young man had everything going for him. He was to become Canada's leading mountaineer, our leading mountain rider, our leading mountain what did you do in the clubs that you went to in Britain? Lecturing.
Lecturing and
yeah.
guiding and all sorts of stuff. Historian.
Anyway, this man is the man I'm about to introduce, who has done wonderful things. And we're going to stay here this afternoon until you all realize just what he's done and appreciate it. But what he said in early life that was, it shows you how mature he was. Class is needed. And this is talking on his first mountain experiences with his buddy, Jerry Walsh. And he said, to us it was where right and wrong really mattered, where feelings were so much more intense and the facades of the world were stripped away. How did you ever, it sounded like you discovered a new world.
I did. And you know, it happened all at once. I grew up in Calgary, southwest Calgary, and sort of in the country club scene a bit. I was a golfer, and we were members at the Glencoe Club. And you know, all those years as a teenager, young teenager, I felt something was wrong, something was missing. And there were the mountains out there on the horizon that, you know, I could see them every day when I walked to school, walking to Viscount Bennett High School. And I decided I wanted to go to the mountains. So there was an older fellow who was a member at the golf club, and I asked him, and people said that he did some climbing and some skiing, and I asked him, how can I go to the mountain? How can I get up there? Like, what do I do?
Yeah.
And he said, go down to the Youth Hostel Association and sign on for one of their trips. And I did, and it was the May long weekend of 1962, Victoria Day long weekend, and I went up to...
You were still in your teens at that time? Eh?
I was in grade 11.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was 17 years old, and got in a car with a couple of other young people. Scott Meese was one of the fellows, and a woman by the name of Margaret McGugan. Well, a young girl, she was 17 too, and very...
And now we call her?
Margaret Moser.
Yeah.
And we got in the car with an older guy who was driving, Earl Smith. And you know, on Friday night, we drove up past Banff, and I had, of course, been as far as Banff before, but once we turned off on the Icefields Parkway, it was just a, you know, late in the evening, the sun setting, you know, stop and watch a moose along the flats there, the Alexandra River flats. Anyways, we went to the Hilda Creek Youth Hostel, spent the weekend ski touring, and I just fell in love with the mountains. The smell of wood smoke in the air, and the stars, and the moonlight on the mountains.
Because they had you signed up for university before this, didn't they? I mean, didn't your parents have another profession in mind?
Well, my parents didn't have it. I was supposed to be a golfer. I was supposed to be a golf pro. Anyways, the mountains.
He's a tremendous golfer, let me tell you that.
The mountains, it was if I had stepped out of a box, this man-made human world that we live in, you know, I just stepped out a door, out of this box, into this magic world of the mountains. And after that, I really never played a game of golf again. Broke my dad's heart because he wanted me to be a pro. And after that, for the next 60 years, I just devoted myself to a mountain career. Yeah, and it took a long time, but eventually I make enough money that I'm paying income tax now. That's success when you pay income tax.
I thought you said you loved Canada.
I'm happy to pay income tax. As Hans Moser told me once, he said, Chic, if you're not paying income tax, you're not making any money.
Yeah.
And now I pay a little bit of income tax, and I'm happy to pay it. And I'd like to be paying more. It would mean that I would be making more. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way it works.
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I think the 60s were big for you, weren't they? I mean, once you hit the 60s, you must have developed your skills very, very quickly. How did you develop them? Was it from people that you climbed with, or did you read on it, or?
We read books, but in those days there was very little in the way of instruction. My mom absolutely insisted that I not climb mountains, but as we all know, you don't tell a willful 18-year-old boy what to do. And I went and climbed mountains. What she should have done is she should have signed me up for one of Hans Moser's climbing weeks.
Yeah.
And she should have got me some good instruction. But there wasn't much in the way of instruction, so Jerry and I, we just went out, and I mean, the first year I climbed, we went up and climbed Gromar chimneys that, with a rope and 2 or 3 pitons and
So you were a
hiking boots.
little lucky at.
Oh
really
yeah, very lucky. Yeah. Well, you gotta in the game of mountaineering, you need a lot of luck. Even if you climb at a modest level, it's really dangerous. And to be honest, I have known hundreds of young men and women who have died climbing. Hundreds.
Yeah.
It's really dangerous. And
I was going to ask you, sort of aside, the personality of climbers. They're sort of standoffish to a degree, aren't they? They think that they're the only people that are doing this and can do it, climbing. Do they look down on people that?
Well, I think you have to remember that there's climbers and there's climbers. There's the climbers and there's skiers and there's skiers. There's the ones that we see in the media all the time who are doing incredible feats of climbing and skiing. But then there's the tens of thousands of other ones who are just ordinary people and share the cubicle next to you in the office and just go climbing.
Yeah.
Most climbers are just ordinary people.
Yeah, it's human nature to.
Yeah. But not too much about me, Eddie. This is somewhere in there. You gotta let me ask you a question.
I'm more interested in your life than.
Let's do both. Did you have an epiphany in your life? You've
What's that word?
A moment that really you fell in love with something. You've had a career as a filmmaker and as a skier.
Other than iris cutting?
We've all had the iris cuttings in our lives.
I tried. Do you know, I'm going to reveal a little bit that I think is true. I was hit on the head in grade 5 with a baseball bat. I was an honor student the year before, and that never occurred again. And it was 10 years before I had an operation on that head. So I really am not normal. I mean, I've survived. I'm a survivor. It gave me strength, I guess, in other areas, but not in the intelligent area. Because I didn't know what I wanted to be. I always had this entertainment feeling that I wanted to do. Photography, I saw tourists walking around. They seemed happy, and they take a picture every now and then. I thought I could do that. I could be a tourist, but that wasn't going anywhere either. And as a writer, one teacher said you could write. Another teacher said, you don't know what a sentence is, So I didn't make up my mind until I'd gone to Europe one year when I was 27 or so. Oh, speaking of 27, I met Marilyn Monroe when I was 27, and she was 27. We were born a week apart. She was born June the 1st, 1926. And I was born May the 23rd, 1926. And she was here doing a movie in '53. Anyway, that was just a thought that shouldn't have. Going to Europe that year, it was after that. It was 1954, and I stay over there for what it would cost a weekend now, but I was there all year, and I could ski well enough that I could go in the top races there. They weren't called World Cup, but they wanted foreign names. So I went in the race, and they, whatever country I was in, paid my transportation and lodging while I was in that country. But the pictures I took there didn't turn out. So when I came back, I thought I'd better learn. And I went to Brooks Institute in Santa Barbara, California, which was a good school. So I finally started learning something. But that epiphany, I don't know.
What about skiing? You love skiing so much today. Where did that love start?
Oh, gosh. I don't know. I do love skiing. It's to make a run in powder snow and have those little snowflakes follow you down. It's another romance type of thing. I love skiing, yeah. What sort of fed the entertainment bit, I'd been in a movie made at Sunshine in 1947 by Universal International. It was a New York crew, and it ended up being nominated for an Academy Award. It was a travel type film, but it was largely Bruno skiing, and our junior ski team followed him down the mountain, and we had to fall off one at a time, not being able to keep up to Bruno. That was the story script. And I did some comedy skiing in it. And at that time, they used to show newsreels all around the country, Canada, United States. And they took a bit of my comedy skiing, which was kind of funny. I gave the film full credit. It was me the reason it was nominated for an Academy Award. That was untrue. But anyway, the manager of the Lux Theater here let me in the movie all the time. It was showed in Banff for free. So I thought this must mean something. But I had no future there.
It was good. You were who's seen that film, Snow Capers? It's just fabulous, and I think you could probably see it in the archives. Is it available, Elizabeth? Yeah, it's available. Eddie is just hilarious as the guy with two left feet with his skis on, and as he's doing a Charlie Chaplin routine, and he's just brilliant. So, anyways, the film is fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I went nowhere.
Well, you did have a career in entertainment, though.
They just didn't appreciate me.
Well, yeah, but it.
Yeah, but remember I told these people they're going to sit here until they learn about you.
Okay.
Where would you start? That traverse from Jasper to Lake Louise?
We developed very quickly as mountaineers. Mm-hmm. When we skied the Great Divide Traverse in 1967, I had been going to the mountains for 5 years only. I'd only been on 3 glaciers, or on glaciers 3 times. But we had a certain boldness. I very quickly met Donnie Gardner and Charlie Locke, who had a lot of natural ability and good common sense. And we just started doing things very fast. It was an interesting time, actually, the 60s, because before that, in Canadian mountaineering, of course, 50, 100 years earlier, you'd had the Swiss guides and their British and American clients. And that era had sort of run up until the Swiss guides retired in the early 50s. Mm-hmm. And then for a long time, you had the new crowd that came from Europe. So people like Leo Grillmeyer and Hans Moser and Peter Furman and all those guys. And, the going feeling in Canada was, if you couldn't yodel, you couldn't climb. Canadians
Oh,
played,
look.
you don't want to hear me try. No, it really was in the 60s. Hans Moser was right at the peak of his fame.
Yeah.
And a lot of those other guys, Willie Pfister, all those guys, they were running the show. There were no Canadian guides, Canadian-born guides. And then sort of out of the blue, we were inspired, of course, by these guys, and particularly by Hans's films. We would go and see them in the Jubilee Auditorium, and Hans really inspired us. But between 62 and 66, 67, a young group of us just, we learned how to do it. And of course, I can't forget people like Don Bachroth and Lloyd McKay. They were Canadians, born climbers, and they were a little older than us. And in the early 60s, they started putting up the hardest routes on Yam that were harder than the routes that Hans Moser had done. And these were done by Canadians. And then in 66, the summer of 66, Charlie Locke and a British guy by the name of Brian Greenwood climbed the north face of Temple. Spring of 67, us four young
How about
guys.
your winter climb of Assiniboine?
That was
seemed
67.
Yeah, 67. That seemed to be a highlight. Not a highlight, but it was an achievement that not many people were doing it.
Oh, it was a good achievement, and it certainly is one that I'm very proud of. In the winter of 1967, right at Christmas time, when it was cold and miserable,
Yeah.
three of us got to the top of Mount Assiniboine, the first time it had been climbed in the winter. That was Donnie Gardner, Eckhard Grassman, a Swiss mathematician who lived in Calgary, and myself. And also the winter before, Brian Greenwood, Charlie Locke, and I had done the first winter ascent of Mount Hungabi. So
Did you like winter climbing? I mean, was it
nobody
a
likes
special-
winter climbing. If you look in Pushing the Limits, that book that I wrote on Canadian mountain climbing, I call winter climbing the most unpleasant of all pursuits. It is cold, dangerous, scary, dark. The nights are 15 hours long when you're sitting there on the side of a mountain. It's no fun at all. But as Dave
But at
Cheeseman...
the end, you always say, let's do it.
Oh, yeah. And boy, as soon as you get back, you're planning the next one.
Yeah.
You know, and as
Crazy.
Dave Cheeseman said, it doesn't have to be fun to be fun. And that's what climbing's all about. Climbing sometimes can be a lot of fun when it's warm and you're comfortable and you're in control, but a lot of time it isn't fun. So anyways, the point that I was making is in the 60s, that period in the 60s was when born in Canada, Canadian kids and young men, and a few young women, started to take their place. Nowadays, nobody's aware of it. I mean, all of our public safety team here in Banff, Brian Webster, all those guys, they're all born. I mean, Brian's born in Canmore. And all of the guides, all of the snow scientists, they're all Canadians, but at that time, none of them were.
Yeah.
Really, none of them were. And so I feel pleased that and privileged to have been part of that first wave of Canadian-born mountaineers.
Yeah, well, it was brought back to life. Well, you had the 50th anniversary just a few weeks ago, actually, didn't you? When the artist John Hartland
Yes.
had portrayed that trip, and with features, paintings of every phase of it, including close-ups of the 6 climbers.
Yeah.
It,
yeah, portraits of it.
Yeah,
Yeah, I like John, and I certainly like his landscapes, but his portraits are, most of them I would say are not very flattering. But anyways, a portrait doesn't have, there's no thing to say a portrait has to be flattering. you know. Yeah.
Well, in the question period, maybe we could. I bought one of your books at the time, Across the Great Divide, which is the John Hartland painting description of that. This is the book that Chic gave me to look through for questions, and it was published by the Alpine Club of Canada just a year ago when they honored you at what was the presentation? What did they?
I was patron of the Mountain Guides Ball. It's the big fancy dinner that the Alpine Club and the ACMG, the Association of Canadian Mountain Guides, they organize it each year, and each year they honor someone from the mountaineering community as the patron, and they do a little booklet on that person. That person. So Joanna Croston did that.
Yeah, it's really well done. Do you agree with it?
Oh yes, yeah. I worked very closely with Joanna on it, and she did a good job. I have to say though that it's left out all the juicy parts, all the bad parts. It's all the good parts of my life, not all the bad parts, and that's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a celebration.
But you always stick to the book, don't you? I mean, you don't.
I'm one of those guys. You know, I've been, pardon my French, but I've been a shit disturber all my life, and I've made life difficult for a lot of people in the Guides Association and the Alpine Club and
have you really?
Universities. Yeah,
I don't think I want to do this interview with you.
No, because I'm a bit of a contrarian, and there are some people who just smile and nod and wouldn't say shit if they had a mouthful of it.
I don't like saying that.
But no, I'm not that way. I actually, over the years, have spoke my mind. But I have to say that now at the age of 72, I have finally become the man my mother wanted me to be.
And what is that?
Polite. Polite.
I know you told me
all that stuff.
You're an extreme plodder.
Yes, that's there's lots of athletes out there who make big reputations in the mountain world as climbers and skiers. Well, I'm not a very good skier, and I was a decent climber, but not a great climber. But what I'm really good at is plodding. I'm an extreme plodder, and that's what I do in everything, even in my books.
And you're proud of that?
Well, you got to be proud of whatever you are. You know, if it's you better love it. Yeah. So, no, even my books, like Pushing the Limits, the story of Canadian mountaineering, that took me 6 years to full-time, working on it full-time, with no advance, just living on $6,000-7,000 a year at the age of 50, sleeping in my van, sleeping in a tent, but gradually just pulling it all together, and in the end, it made my reputation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did, as a real, a bona fide, a real serious historian.
Yeah, you really are.
Yeah.
Back to me.
Back to you. Yeah. Good.
While Chic was making that historic traverse from Jasper to Lake Louise, I'd gone on to freelance photography. And does anyone know what a freelance photographer does? Well, anyway, they get a camera of quality make, and you build up a reputation to cover assignments for TV stations, film companies, or whatever. And I had built up quite a clientele, and I was on assignment while he was doing this traverse. It was in May, I think you started, didn't you?
Yeah.
I was sent on an assignment to the Crow's Nest Pass to cover a mine disaster. 15, 16 miners had been killed in an explosion. And you got assignments like that. Some of them were wonderful and uplifting, and others were like this disaster in Natal at the time. It was really a unpleasant covering that because there's so much sorrow there. But when I went on assignments, I would also carry a still camera. All this was video, of course, or cinematography. I would carry a still camera, and I have a couple of pictures there now. One that I had taken at that same time. One is the mining cars that show that all life had just more or less ended in the Crow's Nest at that time. And yet there were kids out in the street playing hockey. And it's Canada,
Yeah.
you know, and you can, excuse me, you can have sorrow, and just down the road, you've got the life of this wonderful country carrying on. Anyway, I had happy assignments. Obviously, this wasn't one. I apologize for this. But I had assignments that were much more uplifting. I worked on Superman 1 and 3. It was a British director came over, and he hired me. We went. He had permission. We had permission to shoot along with the regular crew because Britain had put quite a bit of money into the Superman films. But it was great because Superman would do his thing, and then they'd take a break, and we'd go in and interview Superman. And gee, how'd you do that? You know, and it was one of the best assignments that I'd had for quite a while, and that was on Superman 1 and 3, and so it was my more or less touch with the big time. I found out later by talking to some of the crew, they said, "Did you notice we didn't really cooperate with you?" And I said, "No, I didn't notice that." But I was a non-union operator, and they were union. And so when certain things would overlap, they wouldn't cooperate at all. But I had some good assignments like that.
And do you feel you could tell us a little bit about your television career in Calgary? Is that appropriate? You want to talk about that? That
goes back to my acting phase again. My life was sort of 3 periods, in keeping with the Canadian hockey theme again. But I had worked with CHCT in news and sport with Ed Whalen. He was a great guy, and one I enjoyed working with. I'd been there, worked there for 3 years, and that's where I developed a lot of my cinematography. And at the end of that period, I decided to go to freelance. And I knew a fellow who worked at the station who was taking a group of people over to Russia on a Goodwill farm tour. And I thought, I'll go along with that. So I went with this and filmed it and made a film, which I later showed at the Jubilee Auditorium. But that got me away from CHCT, and then at that time, CFCN was just starting up. And I said, well, I don't want to do filming. I'd rather go into production. So I went into production, and I was talking to the people, the Love family. They were radio people. They didn't know anything about television. And I'd had experience in television, so I could tell them anything I wanted. You know, this is the way it's done. And one day they said we should have a kids show. And I said, right, we need a kids show. Who will we get? And he said, how about you? And I thought, okay. About at the same time, this was up at the top of the hill in Calgary. You know where CFCN is. Anyway, it was out in the country at that time, and this kid had ridden up to the station on his horse. And I said, would you mind coming in the studio? He brought his horse into the studio, and I interviewed him and the horse. And that was the start of the kids show. I did that for 5 years.
Yeah.
And kids would come up celebrating their birthday or whatever they wanted to celebrate. And the twist was big during that time. And every kid, no matter how small, they could twist. They'd get out there and and they're really grinding it away. And their parents are, just eating it up. My kid's got a future in television. That's the same type of thinking I've lived with. I've been telling you. Anyway, it was a great success, and we had to have so much Canadian content at that time. When you're starting up a Canadian television show, it can't all be these American shows. So there was times my show was an hour long. And if we were short Canadian content that week, they'd come out and hold up a finger, which normally means another minute. In this case, it meant an hour. I'd do another live hour show. I'd bring the kids out and they'd dance again. I'd show another cartoon. And some of them told dirty jokes because they always... Well, not some of them, but there was one that was really dirty. And they always had an uncle, these kids, or somebody that would put them up to it. Just say this to them and it'll go over big. And there's one that put me off the air. I still don't repeat it. It was the foulest thing that I can recall, but there was highlights like that.
Yeah.
And I had a late night talk show, and that again was created just for Canadian content. They didn't give me a budget or anything, it was all make believe. But it was wonderful.
Wow.
I would, the thing that makes it all worthwhile, how are we doing on time?
I think we're just about getting ready for some questions, maybe.
Oh, yeah, I just want to say, everything I did was I seem to be having trouble today. Excuse me a minute. It was all for my family, my 2 girls. Yeah, well, anyway, it was that's why I did it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to break up like this. Oh, and another thing, I take a picture every day, whether I need it or not. Thank you.
Good. So, have we done just about 50 minutes? Is that close to 50 minutes? 45? Yeah. Maybe we should take some questions from the floor. I'm sure there's somebody out there who would like to ask Eddie or myself a question.
It's a pretty young crowd, Chic. I don't know. We may not understand their...
Is that Patty back there? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Patty asked Eddie where he learned to ski.
Well, I lived in Edmonton for a couple of years before coming here, and I had skis, I didn't know they were for going downhill. I thought they were just, going around the flat. So that was my first skiing. But in Banff, when I really started skiing, we used to ski on Caribou. Is it Caribou?
Yeah,
It goes straight up Tunnel Mountain.
yeah.
There wasn't any houses, and we used to ski on that slope, the lower slopes of Tunnel Mountain.
So how old were you then?
I was 8. They were short skis. They were made of pine, cheap wood, and there was no bindings. We used to cut tubes from cars. You cut them in strips like big rubber bands, and you put that around the toe and around the heel, and it would just keep the ski from going off. It didn't give you any control, but that was it.
Yeah, the gear has got better over the years.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Another question? Elizabeth?
How did you meet?
Yeah.
How did you come across, how did you get the name Headhunter?
Okay.
What's that all about?
The question from Elizabeth is, how did Eddie get the name Headhunter? It was called the Headhunter show, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
that was what the my kids show was called, and we couldn't do that today. I wore an Indian headdress and a buckskin jacket. Wow, the Indians, I would have had a couple of arrows in my back for sure, and rightfully so. But I called it Headhunter, not meaning anything in the name, but I wore the Indian clothes, which was really bad taste, but no one complained at that time.
No. Okay. Another question?
And
Yeah.
another thing, when
Oh.
they wrote Headhunter, they highlighted the ED in head, so you could read it. You could just read the ED in Headhunter or Headhunter.
Eddie,
Yeah.
tell us about the North Quay Smoker. Your 17 runs that day, when the best skier on the hill hit 21, you got 17 on one of the steepest hills in North America. Tell us about it.
I know I will gladly repeat that because I was in my 80s at the time, and my legs, for some reason, were pretty good. I didn't find it hard skiing that run at all. And you're right, I did 17 runs within the 3 hours and enjoyed it. Yeah, and then there came a time a couple of years later where all of a sudden I wasn't coming near 17 at all. I was, it kept going down. And yeah, that's where I am now. My legs are yelling for help. But I still ski the big chair, and I've skied it every year since 1948 when it opened up.
Fabulous. We've got time for a few more questions if there's any out there. Yes, at the back.
Yeah, Eddie, just in regards to your hockey, because you played a lot of hockey throughout the years, and some fabulous pictures of some of your teams. Do you want to just elaborate a little bit on the hockey that you played in the Banff area?
Yeah, I'll just repeat the question. Graham's question is asking Eddie to elaborate on his hockey career over the years and hockey in Banff.
It's been verified now?
Yeah, yeah. It's just for the video.
Oh. Yeah, I loved hockey. That's what I wanted to be. I still wait and expect the Edmonton Oilers to phone me every time they have an accident or an injury. But of course, I played a lot of hockey. I was a fast skater, so I could survive most of the game. They'd get me before the game was over. But while I was skating free, I really enjoyed it. We did win a national or a provincial title in 1947. It was an intermediate game, and it was played in Red Deer. And I don't know, I might even have a picture of that. But I wanted to be a hockey player. At that time, I was a half a foot too short and 50 pounds too light. Now, if I tried, I'm a foot too short and 100 pounds too light. But I love the game, yeah.
And there was a real rivalry between Canmore and Banff, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was. The Canmore ladies used to throw briquettes at us at and the odd thing of that, I ended up playing for Canmore for a couple of years. So there's friendship in hockey as well.
Do you still rollerblade?
I rollerblade, yeah. I rollerbladed yesterday. I went out and if you want an activity, it's good for you, any of you. It's rollerblading is good. If you've done any skating in your past, it'll come to you quite naturally, and it's good.
Fran?
The old stories of Banff tell of putting your skis over your shoulder downtown and walking right up to the top of North Quay and skiing down. Did you ever do that?
Yeah, I used to climb up. I went up with my dad on several occasions. Jumping was big in those days. And they'd get, several thousand people out just to watch the jumping. And I remember walking up there with my dad. We didn't do that very often, like you say, walk up. We generally, there used to be people going up there that would give us a ride. And that was what started the family feeling, I think, in North Quay. Every family went to North Quay on the weekend. And if you were left behind, there was no kids left behind. Somebody would always look after them. But there was a lot of walking up during the carnival at that time. A lot of people walked up. They didn't take taxis, that's for sure.
When was the road built up to Norquay?
Oh, the road was built up in the 20s, I believe. It was before. Well, there used to be lumbering up there, forestry.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why the road was that. Does anybody know why the road was made? Because it was built. It wasn't completed before the skiing, but it was started before skiing started. Okay. Yeah.
One more question.
Eddie, how would you describe the changes that you've witnessed in Banff in your time?
Oh, there are a lot more coffee shops. That's about it.
Good. Well, thank you very much.
I did see one lady back there.
Okay. Okay, Heather.
Yeah, hi. Well, as you know, it's a big year for the Winter Carnival. You just brought up the Winter Carnival, Eddie. I just wonder what your favorite memories were of the Banff Winter Carnival.
Well, you're not going to like this. But it deals with a little fictional story I wrote about the beaver that discovered snowboarding. A lot of our Canadian history, which is great, it's really a downer when it comes to Canada and the beaver, because we killed millions of beaver, or I'd like to think the companies out of Europe, out of England, killed all these beaver just so society of Europe could wear a stylish hat. But anyway, I was to get back because this beaver discovered snowboarding, and we didn't get credit for it. he was watching the opening ceremonies of the Winter Carnival in Banff in 1917, and it was unusual for this beaver to be out in winter like this, but this guy, his name was Rainy Bay, and he really contacted humans quite a bit. Anyway, he was watching the opening ceremony when Ike Mills, one of his dogs, saw this beaver, Rainy Bay, and he started chasing him. And actually, Ike Mills' dog, he was called Skokie. Ike Mills had given me this dog actually for a while when I was young to look after. But anyway, that's another story. This dog chased the beaver, and when the beaver got away, and when he looked around to see where he was right by a set of flags that had been set up for a race. Slalom racing was just starting then. And they had a variety of people going down, and they started the race by dropping a flag and somebody at the bottom starting a watch. Anyway, this beaver saw this, and he wanted to do things that humans did, or wanted to try them. So he got over to this gate, and he wondered how he couldn't get 2 feet or he couldn't get skis on his 2 feet because he didn't have 2 feet. So he flipped his tail underneath him and sat on it like a snowboarder would. And he went down through the gate, yeah. And he accidentally knocked over a flag at the top, which the timer down below, he didn't know why. He just saw the flag in a reaction. He started his clock. And Rainy Bay went down through there on his tail, snowboarding, or tailboarding. And he went through the finish line, and the gatekeeper had been celebrating quite a bit. He was the opening ceremony, and he stopped his watch. He didn't see the beaver because it had been established that humans don't see things that they don't believe. And they couldn't believe that this beaver would ski their course. And anyway, the gatekeeper was talking to himself by this time. And he said, wow, 30 seconds, nobody could ski it in that time. So Rainy Bay knew that he had won the race, but they weren't going to give him the prize, which was a Canadian silver dollar at that time. So I'd have to go back in this. It all started with me kayaking.
Oh, Eddie.
Have you got time? I'll throw it in. Anyway, it was, I'd been given a kayak, this is true, by my family for my 90th birthday, and I was out in the Vermilion Lakes playing Thomas. What was the map maker? David Thompson, yeah. And anyway, this little beaver knew that I knew Nancy Green because I'd taken pictures of her. And he wanted me, it happened that the beaver were given a special power that if the atmospheric temperatures and condition and pressure was identical to something that happened years ago, it could be brought back. And all of a sudden, this little beaver wanted to present this to me, so I would present it to Nancy Green, who is she's a what? She's a...
Canadian ski racer.
No,
She's the Canadian. She's
She's
a
a-
senator now, but she's also the Canadian sportswoman of the century.
yeah, but she's a senator. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. She's a senator. And they wanted me to make contact and see if she could help us get recognition by making a silver dollar for this 150th birthday as the prize for really deserving to Rainy Bay, who won that race 100 years ago.
Wow. Okay.
And give credit to the Beaver for inventing snowboarding 50 years before the humans did it. One other thought, and I mentioned Nancy Green, she has cancer. And I got an email just today that it looks promising. She's going to be okay.
Leo's got a question here.
Ask Ed, a short while ago you went to Toronto and you rollerblade the Terry Fox run.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what the surrounding was saying when they saw you with the rollerblades?
Well, you don't go to Toronto for a good time. But my youngest daughter, Kendall, lives there. Here I go again, with two beautiful daughters, and I entered the Terry Fox with them. And I went on rollerblades. Yeah. My daughter Kendall is a cancer survivor. Let's end this, eh?
Okay, good. Thank you, Eddie.